Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with everybody today to talk about the will of God. And I think this is something that a lot of sincere people really struggle with. I mean, they want to know what God's will is for their life, and they want to know what they're called to do, and they know that this is where their true happiness lies and all of that. And they think that it's something that maybe lies external outside of them. And I know for me, that's how I used to see the will of God for my life, that it was kind of this distinct path or calling that was external to me and outside of me, and that I had to seek in order to find it. And I kind of had all of these very deep longings and deep intuition of who I was and what I was called to do, deep knowing even, and yet I didn't trust it. And I would say, well, I think this is just my will, but how do I know if it's what God wants me to do? And so therefore I have to seek out what his will is for my life, and kind of separated the two. And really, we got to understand that what is deepest within us, what is the truest, deepest desires within us, is really the will of God, and it needs to be trusted. And with the fall is where we kind of developed a kind of separation mentality and independent will, if you will, and where we basically had to, try to do things on our own and be independent from God, and it was all up to us, and we kind of started developing a will that was kind of contrary. It was about ego and about self-preservation and ambition and self-focus and all of these things. But actually, God redeemed our wills, and that is now what is truest and most deep inside of us. And we see this taking place in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I think that sometimes we think that Jesus was kind of schizophrenic or something in the moment, and he's basically trying to dodge the cross and saying, I don't want to do this, God, but, I guess your will be done. And kind of that he's schizophrenic in this moment. But again, I've mentioned several videos about the vicarious life of Christ, and that his whole life is a redeeming event. And so actually what Jesus is doing in this moment in Gethsemane is redeeming our wills. He's literally stepping inside of our fallen, egoic, Adamic will that was contrary to God's, that was independent and all about the ego. And he's taking that, let this cup pass from me, and he's bending it back to flow in synergy with God's will. He's bending it back to the not I, your will be done. And he's bringing our wills that had been lost back to flow into synergy with the will of God. And so this is what is truest about us. Our wills, that's where our freedom is, who we are, our deepest desires and intuition is really the will of God working through us in synergy with our wills. And so I'm not talking about sometimes like quick fixes or counterfeit affections that we pursue. That's not what I'm talking about. It's what is deepest about us, what is truest about us, is actually good and needs to be trusted, and that is God willing through us, as us, in us. And so Pseudo Dionysius, he described this as a symmetry of ecstasy, which is really wild. How do we know that we're doing the will of God? Well, what makes you feel most alive? Where do you lose track of time and you're lifted up out of yourself in a literal ecstasy standing outside of yourself? And that's what Pseudo Dionysius described this as, is that basically God pours himself into us, the divine will and his divine life he pours into us humans, and the divine will lifts us up out of ourselves, and we stand outside of ourselves doing the will of God, and just literally in ecstasy, and we kind of just lose track of everything and are just lost in that moment and just so full of joy, and we pour back into God. And so we're experiencing ecstasy, and at the same time, God being divine is kenosis. He's pouring of his divinity into us, into our humanity and incarnation, and he's standing outside of himself and in ecstasy. And so it forms like this symmetry of ecstasies, which is just the divine dance, man, the flow that where it makes us feel most alive and makes us feel like most purposeful, and where our desire and passion just burn. And it didn't matter whether we were getting paid or not to do this stuff. We just want to live in that moment, and that's what we're called to do. That's God's will for our life, and everything else will just take care of itself after that. So I just encourage you to trust your will. It is God willing through you and in you, and to just think about what makes you feel the most alive and just pursue this and just be and express and enter that divine dance, the symmetry of ecstasy. God bless.